In the 1920s and 30s, most Westerners in China knew next to nothing about the Chinese Communist Party. Although it had been founded in Shanghai in 1921, it wasn't for another 15 years that Western reporters and newspaper editors began to realize that the Communists were a significant political force and that they'd play an important role in determining China's future. The story we're about to tell is that of an American, I'm afraid, not British, who helped to set the stage for the party's coming out, its first appearance in the world's media as a major Chinese political movement. One rainy afternoon in February 1917, a young man named J.B. Powell came to the Astor House Hotel here in Wangpu Road to meet Thomas Millard. They'd both been students at the College of Journalism at the University of Missouri in the United States. Millard had invited Powell to join him in Shanghai to help him run a newspaper. They met here in the hotel lobby. Millard had realized that China had no weekly English-language newspaper, dealing with political affairs from an American perspective. Shanghai was full of Westerners from all the major powers. This, he thought, was a niche which was just waiting to be filled. Powell asked him, "What are we going to put in this newspaper?" "Anything we damn well please," Millard replied. They called it Millard's Review of the Far East. It was registered in the International Settlement, and later the name was changed to the China Weekly Review. Before long, they had more news than they knew what to do with. In China, Powell said, the pot was constantly boiling over. The front page headline of the review on April the 2nd, 1927, announced "Nationalists Take Over Shanghai." The accompanying article described Chiang Kai-shek as playing the central role in the victory of the Northern Expedition. It's pretty well established that the nationalist forces, providing they stick together, are in a position to take power as the real government of China. 3 weeks later, following Chiang Kai-shek's coup on April the 12th, Powell wrote an editorial asking, "Can the nationalists get along without the communists?" He noted that the split between Chiang and the communist-led labor union had stirred up a hornet's nest, and as a result the air was thick with rumors and with charges that Chiang was worse than the warlords who'd preceded him. That was Powell's style: frank, outspoken, and not afraid to stick his neck out. He and Millard were known locally as the Missouri Mafia. But not even the China Weekly Review had been able to obtain an eyewitness account of what the communists were really like. It was known that Chiang Kai-shek's forces had surrounded them in their strongholds in the mountains of southern and central China, and that they'd been forced to withdraw to the west. But that was all. For Powell and his colleague Edgar Snow, who also hailed from Missouri, getting first-hand information about the Red Army became an obsession. Time passed. Powell had been in Shanghai for almost 15 years. He'd come to love the city. But storm clouds were brewing. One day he believed China would face a crisis, threatening its very existence. He felt that when that happened, America could play an important role. On September the 18th, 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria. 4 months later, they launched the Battle of Shanghai, which ended with the city being declared a demilitarized zone. These were the opening skirmishes of the Pacific War. Only in the late 1930s did the West begin to understand that the communists and the Chinese nationalists could tie down Japanese forces, relieving the pressure on the Allies from the Axis powers. By then, the West had learned more about the communists and their mysterious leader, Mao Zedong. One of the earliest accounts appeared in this journal, the National Review, published in Chinese in Paris in 1936. It was entitled Red Army Travelogue and gave the first detailed description of the Long March. The author was a certain Lien Chun, who turned out to be none other than Chen Yun, who'd been sent from Zunyi to Shanghai to report to the Comintern and had then made his way to Moscow. The article, 30,000 characters long, traced the Red Army's route for 6,000 miles from Jiangxi as far as Luding and the battle on the Dadu River. It was the first full account to appear anywhere of the epic journey which ensured the Red Army's survival and its final victory. Chen Yun's article, important though it was, had a limited readership. 8 months later, Powell's friend Edgar Snow would make Mao and the Red Army known all over the world. In November 1936, Snow's interviews with Mao were published in the China Weekly Review, together with a photograph Snow had taken of Mao wearing a Red Army octagonal cap with a 5-pointed star. For the first time, people could put a face to the man leading the Chinese Revolution. A year later, after the Battle of Pingxinguan, when the 8th Route Army won the first victory by Chinese forces against the Japanese, the review published another picture showing the army commander Zhu De, Zhou Enlai, and the leading generals Peng Dehuai and Lin Biao. 13 years later, these men would rule China. The story of J.B. Powell had a more somber ending. He was strongly opposed to the Japanese, and when they occupied Shanghai, he was arrested, tortured, and imprisoned in a concentration camp. The Weekly Review was closed. By the time he was freed, renewed conflict was brewing between the communists and the nationalists. Powell didn't live to see the communist victory. He died a broken man in New York in 1947. Two years later, Mao proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic from Tiananmen in Beijing. And over the succeeding decades, China was transformed into a modern nation-state, laying the foundations of the country we know today.